Hello, everyone. Now, I know that it's hard to keep up on top of what's going on in the Holy Land, but if you want to know more about what's happening here in Israel, I'm Aaron Porras, and this is the Weekly Review. It's official. Israel on Tuesday finally signed two separate bilateral normalization agreements with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, the third and fourth Arab countries to sign such agreements with Israel following Egypt and Jordan. A picture worth several thousand words. A historic day in the White House lawn as the United States officially brokers two more normalization agreements between Israel and Arab states. United States President Donald Trump, foreign ministers from the UAE and Bahrain, Abdullah bin Zayed and Abdul Latif al-Zayani, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, all signing the momentous documents.
Today, the world sees that they're choosing cooperation over conflict, friendship over enmity, prosperity over poverty, and hope over despair. They are choosing a future in which Arabs and Israelis, Muslims, Jews, and Christians can live together, pray together, and dream together, side by side in harmony, community, and peace.
This day is a pivot of history. It heralds a new dawn of peace. For thousands of years, the Jewish people have prayed for peace. For decades, the Jewish state has prayed for peace. And this is why today we're filled with such profound gratitude.
I stand here today to extend a hand of peace and receive a hand of peace. In our faith, we say, "O God, you are peace, and from you comes peace." The search for peace is an innate principle, yet principles are effectively realized when they're transformed into action. Today, we are already witnessing a change in the heart of the Middle East, a change that will send hope around the world. Bahrain, on the other hand, has only signed a joint declaration for peace under the new Abraham Accords, while pushing for peace with the Palestinians as a tenet to those agreements. Israel and Bahrain will move on to more fleshed-out bilateral agreements in the coming weeks.
Today's agreement is an important first step, and it is now incumbent on us to work urgently and actively to bring about the lasting peace and security our peoples deserve. A just, comprehensive, and enduring two-state solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict will be the foundation, the bedrock of such peace.
In any case, the big news is that the completed Abraham Accords, signed by United States President Donald Trump, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, and UAE Foreign Minister al-Zayed, has been released for publication. And aspiring to, quote, realize the vision of a Middle East that is stable, peaceful, and prosperous for all, it includes agreements on full normalization of bilateral ties, establishment of embassies and ambassadors, a vow to prevent terrorist or hostile activities while promoting peace in the Middle East, a framework for navigating disputes, and of course, mutual understandings in everything from finance and healthcare to education, environment, water, and tourism. Pro-Israel demonstrators outside the ceremony hailing the agreement for its unique benefits.
This is the first peace treaty since Egypt, really, and then Jordan. And plus, not only a peace treaty, it's going to be an economic benefit for everybody. I mean, that's the main thing, economically, tourism, trade.
Then finally, ending the ceremony, the White House hosted a lunch in which President Trump again signaled a very bright future, with at least half a dozen other nations predicted to soon follow in the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain's footsteps.
Yeah, we're very far down the road with about five additional countries. Frankly, I think we could have had them here today. We thought out of respect, UAE, they deserved it. And Bahrain came immediately after. They really wanted to do it. But we'll have at least 5 or 6 countries coming along very quickly. It's going to be peace in the Middle East.
Now, with respect to the Palestinians, President Trump says that just as other nations are moving on from, quote, blood in the sand, so too will the Palestinians eventually return to the negotiating table. But the Palestinians have so far had a very different response. As leaders sat down to sign the Abraham Accords in D.C., Palestinian militants began firing the first of at least 13 rockets into Israeli cities, Ashdod and Ashkelon. Israeli health authorities reporting well over a dozen patients being admitted to hospital, including 5 people hit by shrapnel, a man in his 20s injured by shards of glass, and several more individuals suffering from shock. And this as pockets of Palestinian and pro-Palestinian protests erupted outside the White House and across the Middle East, including in Bahrain, chanting normalization is treason.
Trying to do it for election issues, and they are trying to do it in terms of showing the world that they are making peace. Peace with whom? There is no conflict between the UAE and Israel. There is no war. There is no border. There is no planes. There is no attacks. There is nothing. Same thing with Bahrain.
Palestinian authorities, meanwhile, are threatening that the UAE and Bahrain will come to regret their decision.
غضب للشعب الفلسطيني ولأمتنا العربية والإسلامية يوم الذلة والمهانة لحكام البحرين والإمارات وهم يطبعون مع الاحتلال الصهيوني. نؤكد على أن هذا اليوم يوم 15 من أيلول سيبقى يوما أسودا في حياة أولئك الأمراء والحكام الذين طبعوا تطبيعا خيانيا مع الاحتلال وتخلوا عن قضيتهم ودعم فلسطين.
For us as a Palestinian, we consider it very deep stabbing in the back of the Palestinians. It is a free offer for the Israelis to continue their occupation for our land and to expansion their settlements and carry on in the process of annexation of many Palestinian land.
Israel, on the other hand, has responded to the rocket fire with at least 10 airstrikes targeting a series of Hamas terror group positions in the Gaza Strip. And 2 Palestinians were later arrested attempting to infiltrate into Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accusing the Palestinians of failing to work towards peace while warning of a hefty price tag for these attacks.
אני לא מתפלא שהטרוריסטים הפלסטינים ירו לעבר ישראל בדיוק בזמן הטקס ההיסטורי הזה. הם רוצים להחזיר את השלום לאחור, הם לא יצליחו בזה. אנחנו נכה בכל אלה שידם שלוחה לפגוע בנו, ואנחנו נושיט יד לשלום בכל אלה שידם שלוחה לשלום איתנו.
All right, and now, briefly, we move back to the new peace emerging in the Middle East as the Rosh Hashanah holidays approach this weekend. And few things represent these 2 events together better than the following images. First, a prayer service breaking out on the White House lawn during the Abraham Accords ceremony. Jews from all over the world standing 2 meters distance apart as the service was conducted. And second, a photo from earlier this month just released showing White House advisor Jared Kushner presenting the King of Bahrain with a very special Torah scroll, or one of the 5 books of Moses from the Jewish Old Testament. The scroll was reportedly written in the king's honor and will be used in a synagogue in Bahrain. And apparently, also, Kushner paid for the gorgeous gift out of his own pocket. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his family have now returned from Washington, D.C. for the landmark signing of the Abraham Peace Accords with Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. Supporters and protesters greeting them upon their arrival. But the Netanyahus tried to keep their distance, at least a little, driving home to enter 2 weeks of quarantine. And none too soon, the Trump administration now reporting that a White House staffer has tested positive for COVID-19. This a day after hundreds, including many dignitaries, gathered on the White House lawn for the Abraham Accords signing ceremony.
And it's a small number of cases. Maybe it's not even cases. Do you have any idea if there's...
Yes, we're not going to confirm the identities of the individuals.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yes, but it did not affect the event, and press was not around the individual.
And it's not anybody that was near me. From what I heard, a very small number. I think you can probably give the number out later on when you find out what it might be. 1 person? It was 1 person. Okay?
In Philadelphia?
It was 1 person. So not too much, not a person that I was associated with. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Still, despite the White House insisting that the staffer was neither near Trump nor the event, better safe than sorry, especially as many at the event were not wearing masks or properly distancing, and as White House correspondents are reporting, not 1 but a couple of positives among the staff. Meanwhile, back in Israel, daily coronavirus infection numbers are looking a little bit better today, but not good enough to avoid lockdowns. In fact, cities like Beersheva and Holon, which until today have had among the lowest infection rates in Israel, are now both red, as defined by coronavirus czar Professor Gamzu's traffic light outline. Nittany Manson with more.
Taking a dip from previous days, overnight coronavirus infections fell last night to about 4,537 new cases in 24 hours. This making for an infection rate of 8.8% as opposed to the 10% in days past. Still, total active infections now number roughly 45,000, with 549 in serious condition, and the death toll rising by over a dozen to 1,165. The highest number of reported COVID diagnoses this week coming from Jerusalem, Bnei Brak, Ashdod, Modin Ilit, Petach Tikva, Beersheva, and Holon. So what to do? Well, the government's response has been to enact a 3-week-long nationwide lockdown beginning 2 p.m. on Friday. And during this time, travel away from the house beyond 500 meters will be prohibited unless going to work in or receive essential services like in food, medicine, government, and press. Public transportation will also be cut to just 50% of normal operations and within a more limited time frame. As for new and notable restrictions not imposed during the first lockdown, these include a ban on visiting private homes of others, as well as permission to arrive at Ben Gurion Airport for approved flights at least 8 hours ahead of takeoff. Many critics, however, have been quick to point out that they think the lockdown's success is unlikely. Both Health Minister Yuli Edelstein and Deputy Minister Yoav Kish even predicting as much, saying that daily infections are not expected to plummet anytime soon, and that restrictions may have to be extended yet again. Well, in the meantime, Israeli President Reuven Rivlin is apologizing for the frustration caused by the government and commiserating with the citizens in an address Wednesday night, while calling on Israeli authorities to do better and for Israeli citizens to comply with regulations anyways.
אני פוגש את מנהלי בתי החולים הנפלאים, את האחיות הנהדרות והמסורות, את הרופאים שעובדים מסביב לשעון, את מד"א וצוותי ההצלה, את החיילים ואת הקצינים, את המדענים ואת המתנדבים. רואה מקרוב את המסירות הבלתי פוסקת, את ההקרבה שלהם, למען שלום הציבור, למען המאבק בנגיף המשתולל, למען הערבות ההדדית שלנו בעת משבר. ואני מבקש מכם, ואני גם בטוח שבקשתי היא נכונה, תנו בהם את אמונכם.
All right, meanwhile, as most Israelis from all communities are getting ready for the closures, thousands of ultra-Orthodox Jews from the Bratslav Hasidic sect are still attempting to make their way to Ukraine for their annual Rosh Hashanah pilgrimage. Meir Rubenstein and Israel Porush, mayors of 2 red cities in Israel, Beitar Illit and Elad, have now traveled to Uman, Ukraine, where the Hasidic pilgrims visit the grave of their religious leader, Rabbi Nachman, every year. And as you can see, despite Israeli and Ukrainian orders not to attempt to travel amidst the pandemic, many worshippers are following suit. At least 2,000 pilgrims from Israel alone having reportedly already reached Uman as well. But many have been met on the border by Ukrainian guards who are refusing them entry.
Я не знаю, хто кому обіцяв пропуск 3,000 громадян. Є постанова Кабінету міністрів України, яка чітко забороняє в'їзд іноземних громадян на територію України. Всі, хто зараз перебувають тут, на цьому місці, були попереджені про те, що в Україні діє заборона на в'їзд іноземних громадян, в тому числі для громадян держави Ізраїль, Сполучених Штатів Америки, Бельгії, всі, хто будуть намагатися в тому числі відсвяткувати Новий рік в місті Умань. Вам це було чудово відомо.
So several hundred Hasidic Jews then, including children, are now stuck by the border with nowhere to go and little to no resources.
На даний момент іноземні громадяни фактично перебувають на території Республіки Білорусь поряд лінії кордону з Україною між пунктами пропуску. За попередньою інформацією, їх там може знаходитися близько 500 осіб.
So much money we give you every year and year again. And you decide to accept the manipulative stand of the Israeli government. We beg you, the Ukrainian government, please allow us to get in. Look, so many people are just sitting here. We came without food, without water. We were told that we will get in. The presidency, the ministry says that we will get in, but eventually, look.
Being a lone soldier in Israel can be hard enough on its own, especially during the holidays. But add a coronavirus lockdown and a growing financial crisis, and the situation can be downright alarming. Still, there is something that we can do. Working to support the roughly 6,300 lone soldiers serving across the Israeli Defense Forces, the not-for-profit Lone Soldier Center is now campaigning to raise 1 million shekels in donations throughout the coming high Jewish holidays. Lone soldiers earn the title by coming to the IDF from certain conditions, like being an orphan, not having parents in the country, being estranged from the family, or being a new immigrant. And so for many, returning home from base or going on leave means going to an empty apartment. Donations to the Lone Soldier Center then go to providing necessities like food or even just clean laundry and other types of emotional or logistical support. So visit lonesoldiercenter.com to learn more and maybe even lend a helping hand. Moving on, justice for the Dawabsha family may be too little, but never too late. Suspected murderer of the Dawabshas, Amiran Ben Uliel, is now being sentenced to 3 life sentences plus 20 years. Then, in addition to his prison sentence, Ben Uliel has been ordered to pay upwards of $283,000 in compensation to his victims, the maximum punishment allowed under the law. Ben Uliel's accomplice, meanwhile, who was a minor at the time of the offense, faces sentencing later this week. Though this does little to soothe Ahmed Dawabsha, now 10 years old.
نحن كعائلة ندعم أحمد ونقف معه ولكن لن نستطيع أن نعطي أحمد ما تعطي الأب والأم.
Uliel and his accomplice are convicted of killing 3 members of the Dawabsha family in 2015 in a firebombing attack fueled by what the courts call an extreme and racist ideology. Parents Saad and Richam and 18-month-old Ali were burned alive, leaving the then 5-year-old Ahmed as the sole survivor of the attack, barely escaping with terrible burns and scarring. The Dawabsha's family lawyers saying that they're pleased with the sentencing and they hope that it'll act as a deterrent to other would-be price tag attackers by defining terror as terror, no matter who carries it out. Defense attorneys, on the other hand, are already vowing to appeal the conviction, pointing to how Ben Uliel's 2 confessions to the crime were reportedly obtained by the Israeli Shin Bet through advanced interrogation techniques, i.e. torture. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's son Yair, along with 24 rabbis, are likewise defending Ben Uliel while criticizing the Israeli justice system. All right, now, as Israelis get set for closures, the Israeli Griffon Vulture is taking to the skies. Decades of conservation efforts are finally paying off, with the bird's population numbers in Israel beginning to stabilize. In fact, the Israeli Nature and Parks Authority is now reporting at least 206 Griffon vultures in the region, up from 184 last winter and less than 150 in 2012. And while you may not think that that's a lot, consider that this species has a fairly low breeding potential, laying just 1 egg per year and starting to lay eggs from 5 years old. Still, with that said, these awesome birds are still considered critically endangered, and the main threat to their population is wildlife poisoning, usually caused by pesticides that farmers use to protect their livestock from predators. Now, foxes, sea turtles, birds, bats, and I'm pretty sure Magneto from the X-Men universe. What do they all have in common? Well, in short, they can all detect magnetic fields like that of the Earth's through a process called magnetoreception. And researchers think that they may have finally figured out how it works. Unlike with Magneto from the X-Men universe, though, the data does not point in the direction of some random genetic mutation, but rather to a symbiotic relationship with magnetotactic bacteria. The hypothesis, coming from researchers in the UK, the US, and Israel, explains that such bacteria are known to exist in nearly all animals that navigate long distances, like sea turtles and whales. And it's thought that the bacteria orient themselves along magnetic field lines, which the animals can then sense. Though the co-authors go on to admit that more testing would need to be conducted to confirm this hypothesis as conclusive. Moving on, Rosh Hashanah, or the Hebrew New Year, begins tomorrow evening, and that means it's time to clean the Western Wall. Twice every year, rabbis of the Western Wall oversee the collection of thousands of notes, prayers and requests for forgiveness, or slichot, stuffed into the cracks of one of the holiest sites in the Jewish tradition. Though this year, of course, is a bit different.
כמו שאתם רואים, מדי שנה אנחנו מנקים את הפתקים, מפנים אותם מבין אבני הכותל המערבי. השנה, לצערנו הגדול, רחבת הכותל המערבי לא הייתה כמדי שנה שרבבות ומאות אלפים ומיליונים של אנשים שפוקדים את רחבת הכותל המערבי, אבל קיבלנו הרבה מאוד פתקים מהעולם שנשלחו כדי להטמין אותם בין אבני הכותל המערבי.
Now, the Western Wall is the last standing remnant of the second Jewish temple complex that was destroyed by the Romans in the year 70. And primarily, this biannual tradition culminates in the burying of the prayers atop Jerusalem's Mount of Olives to make room for new slichot, though there are a lot fewer notes to be buried this year. Because this year, in light of the coronavirus, visitation just isn't what it used to be. And the Western Wall complex workers have also added sanitization to their cleaning duties.
This year has been completely different than previous year. In this period, eve of Rosh Hashanah, the main Jewish New Year here at the Western Wall. Usually the plaza is full packed of 10 and thousands of people coming every night for the prayer of the Slichot, asking for forgiveness. This year the plaza looks completely different. 2,500 people until tomorrow, and from Friday, the closure, less people will be able to come next week before the most important day of the Jewish year, Erev Yom Kippur.
In the meantime, in light of reports that Israel intends to allow limited but continued visitation to the Temple Mount, the Islamic Waqf Authority has retracted its decision to close the Al-Aqsa Mosque during the lockdown. And that's it for ILTV's Weekly Review. I'm Aaron Porras. See you next week.